Hello guys, welcome back to Archangel RC and to a lame duck update, which after this modification has become 10% less lame. After the really disappointing results in terms of flight efficiency that I got from the plane on maiden day, I started thinking of possible ways to improve on that without having to replace components mindlessly, but by fixing some of the ridiculous design decisions on this bird. A few people suggested that the prop is too close to the fuselage, which was also something I was considering already, which both makes it crazy loud and annoying and also reduces efficiency by literally obstructing air from getting to the prop, and then also that flat and thick behind, although jagged, doesn't provide enough undisturbed air for the prop to work efficiently. Basically, it's running stalled a good deal of the time, hence the high amp draw at low speeds. One of my viewers, Jeff, did share with me his design to solve this issue on the aggressor, for which I am grateful, but had both moved the motor back and tapered off the rear, so two mods into one, whereas I wanted to do things one by one to see how much effect each one is going to have and gain a better understanding of exactly to what extent this factory rear end is responsible for the lameness of this duck. Jeff's design is pretty awesome, but I just want to take it step by step, so not going to use it at this time. So, first order of business was to design a standoff for the motor, and I didn't really need it to be anything fancy. Printed out a 50mm one at first, but it turned out there are no bolts long enough to allow me to mount that, so I printed out a 45mm one and used some M5 bolts at 60mm long, which are the longest I could find. Drilled out the motor's X mount and also the plywood mount and put everything together. Remember that rear area that I mentioned in my video and how it would be nice to have a hatch there for access to that compartment? Well, in order to mount the standoff, I had to open a hatch. Work the treat. So, with this done, the prop was a good way away from the fuselage, so I headed to the flying field. Since the nose of the plane is so long, there was plenty of space to move the battery forward so I can get the CG right, and I even put it just a tad bit further forward to get the plane a bit more nose heavy than before to see how it will perform in a stall when it's more weighty at the front. Also replaced the Firefly split with a good old Runcam Swift 2, which surprisingly didn't stop working after the second flight, and just required a rewired connector, which took about 1 minute to do at the field. So, just as a comparison, listen to what it sounded like on maiden day. And now listen to it after I moved the motor back 45mm. Seems to me there is quite a difference in noise alone. Before I would hear it at 2 kilometers out, ridiculous as it may sound, but it is true. Throttle up and you can hear it from 2 kilometers. Now it's flying overhead, gentle cruise, and it sounds like any other run-of-the-mill plane, and you barely even notice it because it is not this ridiculous and obnoxious sound that pierces right into your skull. So right off the bat I can tell this mod is an actual improvement of something. As for the current draw at cruise, I did tests during both flights, but on average I was seeing a 10 to 20% increase in speed at 8 amp draw from the battery. On maiden day, 8 amps would give me only about 50 kilometers an hour with no wind. Now I was going against a 10 kilometer an hour wind at 50 kilometers an hour, drawing the same 8 amps from the battery, so there is a 20% difference immediately observable, and this wasn't a one-off event. I did verify this a few times during this and the following flights, so I'm pretty certain there was a positive result from the modification. Also, I know I don't have an HD recording camera right now, but before I was able to see the resonance lines in the video feed from the motor throttling up, but now there was nothing, or at least I didn't see anything throughout the throttle range, which tells me that either Runcam handles the stuff a lot better than the Firefly, or moving the prop away from the fuselage has reduced high frequency vibrations that were being caused by it being so close to it. Either way, so far only good news apparently. The plane itself seemed quicker too. Last time I tested it briefly at full throttle and it was barely able to get over 80 to 90 kilometers an hour, whereas now it did easily over 100 kilometers an hour, which is also a pretty good improvement too, in the 10 to 20% range if my math is any good. I guess the stock motor does like the 10x7 prop after all. Having done a few cruise and speed tests and confirmed that the modification does make a difference in a good way in that regard, I turned my attention to testing the stall characteristics. To that end, I took it higher, a good deal higher than before, so I'd have enough altitude to hold it stalled for a long while and see what will happen. And keep in mind this time around it has a more pronounced balance to the nose. So let's start with a glide test. All trimmed out in manual mode, I shut off the motor and didn't touch any of the sticks. The aggressor nosed down a bit and got into a steep right bank and kept a pretty consistent turning radius, but not a spiral, but also not a proper glide. One thing is certain though, no autopilot in a fail-safe scenario would mean it won't go far. So at least you'll be able to pick up the pieces. Guess it can be trimmed out more to improve this behavior, but that would mean it will pitch up a good deal when the motor is running, and also I'm surprised it still rolled to the right since I had it trimmed a good deal to the left, at least with the motor running. I also tested in manual mode again what happens when I give it full throttle and it does nose up slightly and start to gain altitude, so imagine what would happen if you trim it to fly level with a slight nose down under no power and you throttle up. It would probably do a flip not long after. Now, with these tests out of the way, it was time to see the stall characteristics and the results were pretty interesting. First test is in fly-by-wire A mode, or for those not familiar with the audioplane modes, in a stabilized mode. Throttle down and full up elevator, and after a short delay to kill off speed, it leaned to the left and started wondering exactly what it should do. And then, little by little, it started to tighten into something of a spiral. At some point I released the elevator, but it didn't ride itself, so then I gave it some throttle and tried to take it out of the spin, but it felt like at this time the autopilot was the one keeping it in there by doing who knows what. So at the end I put it in manual mode and a few seconds later it was out of the spin and headed up to try this same test again, but in manual mode. This time around though it was different. Leaned again to the left and didn't take quite so long to do so, but then it had a very tough time getting into a spiral. It would start to spin, then it would stop and nose up and then repeat. It wasn't anything worrying or horrible looking that would indicate its end is near. Given the glue job on those plywood pieces on the wings, I'm only glad a wing didn't come off during these tests. But anyway, this time around, it really did take me releasing the elevator for it to stop spinning and shaking and to go straight, which was reassuring. So, what did we learn from this? Well, a few things. First, this plane definitely handles better with a heavier nose, not a neutral balance at the CG points. Sadly, this increased heaviness in the nose does not do anything good for the plane's ability to gain altitude at mid-throttle like a lot of my other planes do, and does require a good amount of input to start gaining even a little altitude, but can't have it all, I guess. Second, the autopilot definitely does not help when the plane gets into a tip stall, so should that happen, switch to a manual mode and you have a much better chance of making it. And third, In manual mode, it doesn't really go into a spiral, more of a tight turn that is not an issue to get out of. So, at least now I know the plane itself isn't as bad as I initially thought, but then again, it does take fixing it from the factory state to make it even remotely tolerable in terms of performance and noise. Next step in these trials would be to taper off parts of the rear end by removing foam and then to print out something to achieve that same effect for the motor mount area and to end it all with a nice thin and round edge that would supply the prop with plenty of smooth air, rather than the horrid amounts of turbulent stuff coming out of the back now. As it appears, there is some light at the end of the tunnel for this lame duck, so stay tuned for the future videos. Weather will be rough this week, so not really conducive for flying, but I will try to get this done as soon as possible. As usual, I'd urge you to like, share and subscribe, and also to engage with this video in any way possible, as it does help it get seen more and thus helps this channel grow. I would be very grateful for any support, be it Patreon or the affiliate links in the description of this video, which, at no additional cost to you, do in fact support this channel and keep my heart beating by keeping me fed, clothed and not homeless. A big thank you to all the people who have supported me so far in any way and would continue to do so. I wish you all safe stow and speed testing, and I will see you in the next one.